We're gonna introduce you, Dr. Carter. So, good evening. My name is Rachel Aliff,
And my name's Alex Oberman.
and we are the chairs of this year's Last Lecture Series Committee. We would appreciate it if you turned your cameras on. We are honored to partner with the Humanities Center to hold this event. Thank you so much, Humanities Center. We are so excited to introduce our speaker tonight, but first, let me give you a little background about our chapter of Mortar Board so you know who we are and what we do. Mortar Board is a national honor society that recognizes college seniors for distinguished achievement in scholarship, leadership, and service. Mortar Board began in 1918 as the first national organization honoring senior college women. It was open to men in 1975, but it still preserves its goal to promote and advance the status of women. Overall, Mortar Board members have a lifetime commitment to be the ideals of scholarship, leadership, and service.
The USD Mortar Board chapter was formed in October 2000 by Judith Lewis Logue. Last month, we celebrated our 20th anniversary and renamed our chapter the Judy Lewis Logue Alcala chapter. The National Mortar Board Leadership awarded our chapter the Ruth Weimer Amount Award for Chapter Excellence in 2006 for the best mortar board chapter in the country. Ever since then, our chapter has been recognized as one of the top chapters, which we are proud of and strive to continue.
Mortar Board began hosting the Last Lecture Series event at USD in the fall of 2010. The series is inspired by Dr. Randy Pausch's last lecture at Carnegie Mellon on the topic of achieving your childhood dreams. Dr. Pausch delivered this lecture while terminally ill, making it his genuine last lecture. Thankfully, our speaker is healthy and well. We continue this tradition so that distinguished faculty can convey their thoughts and wisdom pertaining to a topic of their choosing. The Last Lecture Series provides an opportunity for a distinguished faculty member to consider what they would say when giving a lecture as if it were their last.
This year's chapter of Mortar Board is prioritizing work on inclusion, diversity, and equity. To those ends, we created an Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Committee with 2 vice president positions to lead it. Please welcome Maya, one of the vice presidents, to lead us in a land acknowledgement.
Hello, everyone. I would like to start with a quote from Dr. Mark Rose. As we gather for this meeting, physically dispersed and virtually constructed, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. And since this meeting is being held online, a singular land acknowledgement can't capture the richness of our distribution across the US and around the world. But since our chapter of Mortar Board is an organization under the University of San Diego, I would like to share the land acknowledgement that is used at USD. And I also invite today's participants to consider their own position with regard to the land where they find themselves. I want to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaw Nation. I want to pay respect to the citizens of the Kumeyaw Nation, both past and present, and their continuing relationship to their ancestral lands. I encourage everyone to use the link in the chat I will just send to find out whose land you're inhabiting, and please feel free to look at this after the lecture.
Awesome, thanks everybody. All right, now I am honored to introduce our speaker for the evening, Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter. Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter earned his bachelor's degree in business administration from Cornerstone University. Then he obtained his Master's of Arts and Master of Divinity degree in religion from Claremont School of Theology. Finally, he received his PhD in religion, ethics, and society from Claremont School of Theology.
Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter is admired by his students and is an incredibly engaging professor in the range of courses he teaches at USD. He's passionate about social justice and effectively teaches students how to think critically and, most importantly, also take action regarding issues students are passionate about. His research, teaching, and activist interests are in Black, womanist, and environmental ethics, in tandem with combating systemic racism. He also has a particular interest in race, food, and non-human animals. Additionally, he is the co-creator of Racial Resilience, an anti-racism and anti-bias program that utilizes the combined insights of contemplative practices and critical race theories. Isn't this impressive? Well, we aren't done.
Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter is the Assistant Chair and Department Diversity Officer at USD. Stemming from his interest, he is also on the board of directors of Farm Forward, an anti-factory farming nonprofit. He is currently in the process of publishing his book, The Spirit of Soul Food, which I had the absolute pleasure of reading and can say it is quite incredible and worth a read. Lastly, Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter is a commissioned elder within the United Methodist Church. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter.
Thank you guys. Thank you all for inviting me. And that was Perla, thank you for stopping me. That was very nice. I appreciate that. Being boss. I'm like, wow, it's nice to have such kind words. And obviously, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here digitally and have the opportunity to share kind of my thoughts and what came up for me and kind of framing this lecture. And I want to especially thank Rachel for the way she's kind of nudged me into finding time to make sure I can do this. So Rachel and I are both native Michiganders, which is totally a term that people from Michigan use to describe each other. And it's been a pleasure to get a chance to talk to someone from home because, you know, one of the things I'm talking about a little bit later on today is that it still feels home. You know, it still feels like home. I don't ever want to move back, but it does still feel like home, you know, to a certain degree. So, so thank you for the opportunity. So the idea of this talk, as was mentioned and named, is what would you lecture on? What would you talk about if it was literally going to be your last lecture, like your last opportunity to speak to your students, as was the original last lecture was designed. Um, and I kind of expanded it out, and I thought, well, what I say if it was the last time I could talk to some of my family or my friends? What would I want them to know that I thought was critical for them to hear in this particular moment, in this particular social moment? And so when I began to think about this lecture and kind of craft it several weeks ago, I asked myself, quite honestly, after watching Randy's lecture, what would I say to my students if I was going to die? Like, what if I literally knew I was terminally ill and I was going to die? What would I say? This is a picture of my ethics class from a few years ago, and it's the end of the class, the last class. So we're all smiling, partly because I think it was one of my best classes, but also I think we were just really excited the semester was over. And so I thought, what would I say to this class, this group of students? And then I thought, what would I say to my son? So Isaiah is maybe 19 months, so a year and a half tomorrow. Having a child changes you. Everybody says that. Everybody's like, oh, having a kid, it makes, you know, changes everything. And it does. And for some people, I would say that it definitely changes the way in which perhaps they learn how to love, or they learn to love people in ways they didn't know quite was possible. For me, that was not my experience. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. I think being a clergy person has taught me to love in ways that I didn't know were possible. But what it did do, it helped me understand and frame the responsibilities that I have to inform, to mold, and to pass on whatever bits of knowledge that I have to the rest of the world. Because I thought, what if this is an opportunity for Isaiah to hear something that he may never get to hear me say? And so the thing I would want Isaiah to know, and what I would share with all of you tonight, is to kind of paraphrase just the idea kind of spawned from a lecture and a sermon given by a contemplative and mystic by the name of Howard Thurman. He was a theologian, a pastor, and I've talked about him several times in other talks I've given. And if you're ever been in a class of mine, I mentioned his name probably 5 or 6 times. Thurman says that the most important quest in your life is to discover who you are, to listen for the sound of the genuine, to listen for that sound, that there is indeed something that awaits in everyone, something that is unique to them, this sense of self. And that the difficulty we often have with trying to listen to this sound, to try to find this sound, is that there are so many distractions in our lives. There's so much going on, whether it be with social media, actual media, our current political climate, your personal situations with your family, your friends, school, work. There's so much going on that it's so hard for us to be still, right? Not just to be calm, but just actually to be still and to listen for that sound of the genuine in yourself. And I believe that if you can't listen to this sound, if you never get to the point in your life you're actually able to listen to this sound, listen to this unique music that is playing within you, then you ultimately live according to the music of others, the music other people have written for you, rather than the music that is uniquely yours. The first time I heard this phrase, I was struck by its simplicity, and I was struck by its depth. It hit me right in the gut, and I knew that I had found a sacred verse, a parable, a saying from the ancestors that would stay with me and help frame the quest that I was on. It just spoke to what I do to be true. Now, my life has been anything but predictable. And so while I knew I was on some kind of quest, it wasn't something that I cannot ever tell you that I thought I was going to be where I am and end up where I am today. When I was a kid, if you'd have told me that I would end up being a clergy person or that I would end up being a professor, or if you'd have told me I ended up being a vegan, I would have thought you have absolutely lost your mind. This is not something that would ever happen. I just assumed that way of eating, that plant-based diet, if you will, was something for those who just eat granola and hug trees. Who knew I would actually learn to love trees and granola? It's a crazy thing moving to California. It is a crazy, crazy thing. Now, to be clear, I didn't always grow up with like this kind of awareness of this quest, right? To listen to the sound of the genuine. When I was a child, my goal was pretty much to find out ways to get into as much trouble as I could without getting caught. To be honest, I was quite a mischievous child, which I am learning I am probably going to pay for with my son, but that's another lecture. Uh, I grew up fairly poor, right? And I've talked about this in my classes. Like we were really poor at times, and other times we were less poor. And I would say at the best of my childhood, we would have been the lowest of the low possible middle class. I didn't really have any crazy dreams as a consequence. I didn't have parents who were like, "Oh, you can be anything you want to be," or any of that stuff. My parents were like, "No, you just, you need to worry about getting a job." They weren't trying to encourage, they weren't discouraging me to dream, but they weren't telling me to dream about things that for them didn't seem practical or pragmatic. But despite this, I did have one interesting dream. One thing that I thought I might be able to do and pull off. And it was actually to be an astronaut, which sounds crazy, right? To be an astronaut. Every kid wants to say be an astronaut, right? Now, some of you may know what I just put up, the picture I just put up, but that is actually a picture of the space camp that is in Florida, or used to be in Florida. That they've kind of torn this old part down. The reason I know all this stuff about space camp was I got a chance to go to space camp when I was a kid. My parents scrapped and saved up some money. I wrote an essay in and was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to be able to afford to pay for me to go to space camp in Florida. And I loved it. I was like a nerdy kid, and this is when I was in 5th grade, and I just was eating it up. And even while I was there, I made this one prototype. We were supposed to create these kind of things with Legos and stuff like that. And I made this prototype that I won an award for as a space station. And I try to come up with this way to get rid of waste. And some kid in my group was talking about how, oh, you can just like shoot, stuff into space or stuff into the sun and it'll, be fine. And I was like basically arguing with him about the laws of thermodynamics in 5th grade, telling him that matter can either be created nor destroyed. Like how I did not end up actually becoming an astronaut, I don't know, because even when I watch movies now, I still know so much. I do know, I'll say a little bit more about that, but I really genuinely loved the idea of space exploration. I absolutely loved the idea of reaching heights beyond our comprehension. That's something I knew that I didn't quite understand what that meant. I did so well, I actually won an award. I actually won a medal while I was at space camp, which was just the craziest thing in the world. Like I wore this on the plane home. Like I was just like walking around the airport, like here's my space camp medal. I think it's called the Right Stuff Award. They give it to, one of the top space campers or something. I don't know, man. Either way it goes, it's just to prove that I was pretty nerdy, even though I didn't um, I wouldn't, again, I have anticipated this would be what I would do with my life, is be an academic professor. What's crazy about this story is that the second to last day of space camp, an astronaut, a pilot, comes to camp. And at this point, I've always worn glasses in my life. I usually wear contacts, but I'm wearing glasses lately because my eyes have just been super dried. And so I have glasses on, and we're talking about stuff, and we can ask questions. And I asked him a particular question about what it is to pilot, to land the shuttle, because it's, I don't need to get into that. I asked him a question about landing the shuttle. And he says, "Oh, do you want to be a pilot?" I was like, "Yeah, I want to grow up. I want to be in the Air Force, and I want to be a pilot." And he's like, "Oh man, I don't know if you know this, but you can't have glasses and be a pilot. You have to have 20/20 vision." Like, I don't know why he felt like he should say that in front of a kid, like a bunch of other kids, to like crush their dreams, but like that's literally what came to his mind, right? And I sat there and I was like, "Wow, okay, well that's really interesting. I didn't know that, but I just took it in, and I didn't really do too much about it." But what I did learn was this really important lesson that I have on the bottom of the screen. Is that unless you are wealthy and white and straight and male, and apparently unless you have 20/20 vision, you are going to have obstacles put in your way. What helps dictate your success in this life is your capacity to respond to those obstacles. Literally, it is your responsibility that matters in the situation, because these obstacles are just inevitable. I didn't make too much about what the astronaut said, quite honestly, because in my head, I just thought, well, I'll just find another way. Like, that's just honestly what I thought. I was like, if I want to do this, I'm sure I'll figure out a way to do it. I've gotten to Florida, for all accounts, based upon, the work I've done. So I'm sure I'll be able to figure something out. So after a few years, I gave up the dream of being an astronaut and traded in for another dream. And all this happened, quite honestly, because when I was in 5th, 6th grade, I was always been competitive, but I grew like a bunch in the summer, and I got decent at basketball. I was gonna say really good, but I probably better in my mind than I actually was in reality. And I started playing high level basketball and getting recruited to go to college. And so that really took the majority of my energy and my time. I would say specifically, I got more interested in basketball and girls. I should be clear. I got more interested in those two things. I was good at sports. I was really good at basketball. I was less good at girls. I was less good. But that's okay. Everything worked out in the end, which I'll share in a minute. What's interesting about all this stuff is happening when I first finally start getting really good at basketball. I finally start getting on the travel teams. I'm getting invited to go to these basketball camps at D1 schools when I'm 14, which is like crazy. Like in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I might be able to legitimately do this. In some ways, that dream seemed more realistic to me being an astronaut, because this is the dream of so many urban Black kids, quite honestly. But after my freshman year basketball, my mother she was sick all winter, and she just couldn't shake just being sick. Then all of a sudden in the springtime, she started losing her hair. And we didn't quite know what was going on. She went to the doctor, and they didn't quite know what was going on with her, and they couldn't diagnose her. By the time the summer came and I was getting to go my sophomore year, my mother had to be hospitalized, and it took about a year, and they diagnosed her with lupus. Now, part of the reason it took so long is this is the early 90s when I'm talking about this. And in the early 90s, for those of you who don't know, lupus is an autoimmune disease. They just didn't really know. They didn't really know a lot about lupus. They didn't really know a lot about any of that stuff that was this particular disease. And so the treatment plan that she had, everything that they gave her wasn't quite as refined as it was today. And so as a consequence, she was in the hospital for roughly about 2 years, off and on. My dad worked second shift as a janitor, and I'm, as the oldest of four, had to balance trying to play basketball, trying to go to school, and taking care of a younger sister and 2 younger brothers. And that was the bulk of my life. I got up in the morning around 5 o'clock. My brother, Tevin, slept in my room as a baby. I would get them ready, walk them to school, go to practice, get home after school, make sure they had something to eat, usually have some kind of night practice, make sure they got done with their homework, do my own homework, go to bed. And this was my life, basically working like an adult as a child. But I didn't think I was doing anything spectacular. I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm doing anything spectacular. This is just what you had to do. This was literally my best example of what it means to be responsible, to cultivate the ability to respond and make a way out of no way. And what I learned through all that is that even those obstacles, when they are not your own doing, your attitude, your disposition can dictate so much of what you get out of that. And I'm so grateful that I'm close to my brothers and sisters as a consequence of this time we had to spend together. Now, despite these obstacles, I was able to make it away from home. I was able to get out of the tiny town of Battle Creek, Michigan, which in and of itself is a feat because quite honestly, most of my friends from high school are still in this small town. Now, I can't take, and I won't take all the credit for that because a huge portion of that credit goes to my then girlfriend and now my wife, Gabrielle. So this is a picture of us when this is her prom. So she would have been 17 and now at this picture, I think it would have been 19. And so this picture, no, this is Winter Carnival, not prom. So this is January, of 2000. This was right when we first started dating. So yes, I have been with my wife it will be 21 years in January. We have been together, which is fairly crazy. But what was, I think, even more interesting is that neither one of us really wanted to date anybody at the time we started dating. We just kind of like, we had other stuff going on. We wanted to focus on other things. And ultimately, our friendship is really what brought us together. My relationship with Gabrielle is quite honestly the first time I began to intuitively know what it means to listen to the sound of the genuine. Because something about our friendship continued to grow. Something inside me felt alive when I was with her in a way that I couldn't quite explain. And it literally was that sound, that music, that thing that helped me understand that despite our differences on the surface, despite our racial differences, despite our economic differences, and quite honestly, our personality differences, there are so many things in common that have bound us together and that have allowed us to grow into the relationship that we have today. So she went to Michigan State. My wife is actually probably one of the smartest people that I know. She got a full ride scholarship to a public university, which is actually quite hard. And I followed her to Lansing. We lived in a 400 square foot apartment and we were pretty freaking poor. So she went to school full time, had a part-time job. I worked at a grocery store as a grocery store stocker, and she lived with me. So I worked at Gordon Food Service. This is Rachel. You probably know where that is. And so anyway, I had this tiny job, making like, I think at the time, I don't know, maybe like $8 an hour or something, like something insane. And like, so all we could afford to do for our fun nights out on the weekends was go to Blockbuster Video, because that is what they had at that time. They had this thing where we could on Blockbuster on Fridays, if you're in the movie, you could keep it till Sunday. And if you join their membership club, you could rent 2 movies to get 1 free. I remember this because this is literally what we did for a year. This was our fun night out, right? And we laugh about it now, even we joke about it, because it was, we absolutely loved it. Like, we thought it was the best thing. Like, oh, we just... I don't know if you're ever going to understand the joy of walking through movie aisles, trying to figure out which one you want, hoping that they have the movie that just came out that you can actually watch, that it hasn't been all sold out. Streaming has kind of ruined that experience, but for me, it was a genuinely fun and somewhat enjoyable experience. And so it was, I guess I should say, like, this was how it was, and we began to make our lives together. We were married the summer before her senior year in high school or senior year in college. And we owned our first home by the time she graduated. So by the time she graduated, so I'm 22 years old, I own a house and I have 2 dogs. And I am only 22 years old, which is like insane in my head. I'm like, man, I'm set. I don't need to do anything else in my life. I'll keep working at this grocery store. I'm an assistant manager now. I'm making plenty of money. This is all I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Now, I don't want to make it sound like marriage is easy or that my wife and I have never had our share of problems, but there is a point that I want to make before I move on. during my wife's senior year in college, she told me she wanted me to go back to college, and to get my bachelor's degree. She thought I was too smart just to have a high school diploma. I didn't want to go to college because I'd already had, in my mind, a good job. We were living I felt like we were living so much better off than I grew up, that I just felt like we were fine. But that wasn't enough for her, because she felt like I could do better. And she said that shouldn't be enough for me. Fundamentally, my wife has believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. She saw within me potential that I didn't see in myself. She helped me hear the sound of the genuine in myself when I was trying to mute it. And so one really important point that I like to make is, find a partner who wants to support you becoming a better you. Find a friend who loves you. And this doesn't need to be an intimate partner. It can be your best friend, it can be whatever, but find someone who wants to help you be a better you, that's invested in just helping you grow and not seeing you through the filter of their own agenda, right? Or their own projection, but just seeing you for who you are. Surround yourself with those kind of people, because those are the people that you can trust. Those are the people who will be honest with you and tell you what you want to hear, or tell you what you need to hear, rather than tell you what you want to hear. That, I think, is what allows us to begin to learn to listen to the sound of the genuine in ourselves, because sometimes other people hear it in us first. Now, when Gabby asked me to go back to college to finish my degree, I don't think she or I anticipated that I would go to school for 12 years and get a PhD. But here we are. Like, that's basically what happened. I started going to school and didn't stop until I had I don't know, 3 or 4 more degrees. I went to school to get a business degree because that's like what you do. That's what all first generation college students pretty much do. That. Like, you go to school, your parents say, hey, you need to get a job, study business so you can get a job. So that's what I did. And I, to be honest, it's funny. I actually really, I didn't hate business school. What I did appreciate about business school for me was that it taught me how to be an administrator and how to work with different kinds of people. I learned that through playing sports, so I could kind of leverage that skill. And I minored in religion because I kind of had a inkling something was going on in me with this religion thing, that I was really, really interested in it, but I didn't want to do anything with it. I didn't want to tell anybody. I didn't want to tell my wife. I was just like, nah, she's going to freak out. She thinks I'm interested in religion. But I had these 2 events that helped me calm myself, to quiet myself, to center down enough to hear the sound of the genuine within me in this particular moment. In these 2 events, I was able to listen to and follow a path that aligned with what I believe God had called me to do. The first was a call to ministry. Now, I struggled with this call because, as I understood it, being a clergy person meant you were going to be poor, and I didn't want to be poor. I grew up poor, and I was like, I'm not trying to just live, check to check, being someone's like minister. It didn't interest me at all because of out of this fear. And the second thing I saw was so many clergy that I knew had been divorced, and I didn't want to be divorced. So I had these preconceived notions, and I just didn't want to go down that path. So I kept doing the work I've been doing at my church my whole life, because I'd always felt this deep and abiding connection to my faith. I felt this deep and abiding pull towards serving people through this religious lens. And so one day, my senior pastor at the time at this church I was at, he calls me in his office and he's talking to me about some things we have planned to do with the young adults. And he's like, I know you're really struggling with the call to ministry. And I just want you to know that you can talk to me about it whenever you are ready. Now, I had never told anybody about anything about a call to ministry. I hadn't told my wife. I hadn't told my grandma, who I'm talking about in a moment. Like, I hadn't told anybody. Like, so I was like freaked out. I was like, man, like, what's going on? But he was listening to the sound of the genuine in me. He had tapped into this music within me and could discern that this was something I was struggling with. And his naming it gave me the freedom to wrestle with this call. His naming it gave me the opportunity to just acknowledge what was actually going on within me, so that I actually could do the discerning work to see, is this what I think I'm supposed to do? is this who I think I am supposed to be? It was a profound moment that continued to shape and continues to shape my life. The second moment was when my maternal grandmother, Yvonne, died. So this is a picture when I was really young. And we're on a cruise. This is why there's a weird parrot behind there. But it's actually probably the picture I have that has the best smile with my grandmother, because my smiles are just like, I'm just a terrible smiler in pictures. I can't really make it work. So I love this picture because I love how happy she was. Yeah. And so my maternal grandmother, like so many of our grandmothers, right? She was the matriarch. Like she kind of ran the ship. She was the theological rudder of our family. My grandmother had a stroke when she was in her late 30s. And so my experience of my grandmother, my knowing of my grandmother her whole life was someone who couldn't really communicate in words, but more sounds and gestures and things of that nature. So I just paid attention to what she did. And what she did was she read her Bible every day. She still went to church. And she had a spirit like around her. My tradition, we call it an anointing. This was what she carried with her all the time. It just resonated with her. And so, unfortunately, in 2005, I'm sorry, she was feeling really ill and had a seizure, which was just odd. And so she went to the hospital. And the doctors were like, we were really worried about it being another stroke. And the doctor was like, no, it's just a seizure. She should be fine. She just needs to get some stuff regulated. And so all our family goes to the hospital. My grandfather's there, my mother, my aunts, and my uncles, cousins, and we're all in a room. And we're not really crying because at this point we think everything's going to be fine. My grandmother, though, knows it's not. I don't know how she knows, other than just to say that she knows. And so before we get ready to leave, in my family, we always pray. That's just a part of who we are. And normally it's my grandfather that prays. And my grandmother, when she says pray, she doesn't point to my grandfather, which is what she normally communicates. She points to me. She looks at me and says, pray. And in that moment, I knew that she was passing the torch on to me. I knew that this shift was taking place from her to me, that she saw me as this new leader in our family, that I would be responsible, that I would have this pleasure of guiding my family through this difficult time, of eulogizing my grandmother, but also of helping my family make sense of what was happening and what was to come. And that's the role she gave me. It was kind of like a baptism, actually, I would say, is how I experienced it. And so in that moment, I accepted the call that she placed on my life to be a leader, to be a teacher, to guide, to continue to both form and be informed by her, and to have this responsibility within my own community. That's what she was asking me to do. That's what she had been encouraging me to do. And in this moment, she was giving me permission to do it. Because for me, very much a mama's boy and a grandmother's boy, I wasn't really going to do anything without their approval. And so that moment for me pushed me, moved me, continues to move me, as you can tell, to be the person that I know that I have been fundamentally called to be. And so because of this, to do the work that I know that I have been called to do, I knew I needed to go to graduate school, even though I didn't even really know what graduate school like ultimately was. I knew I was supposed to go, right? And so what I decided to do was to basically just apply to a bunch of places and see what would happen and kind of figure out how things would work. And that worked out for me fairly well because I got a lot of acceptance letters. I got pretty good scholarships. But at the end of the day, I was still trying to figure out how I was going to make all this stuff work, right? How was I going to do this clergy thing with this teaching thing, and how this stuff is going to fit in my head? Because I knew at this point I was supposed to be a preacher. I knew I was supposed to be a teacher. I knew I was supposed to be a servant, but I didn't quite understand how I was going to fit all together. And then I began to remember and rest in what I had been taught by my family, by my grandmother in particular. That all too often, I think we ask ourselves the wrong question when we're trying to figure out who we are or where we fit in this world. That all too often we focus on what we want to do. That we say, when we do this, then we'll have that. And then when we do this and we have that, then I'll be happy or I'll be successful. We get so wrapped up in the doing. And what I've come to understand in my life is that this question must be inverted, that we must first discern who we are called to be. That the first and most pressing question we have to ask ourselves is, who are we called to be? Who are you? Who are you? Really? What is it within you that allows you to feel animated? What is it within you that moves you? Who are you when you are by yourself and no one is around to shape you and to tell you who they think you're supposed to be? So often we focus on the object, the doing, right? We think when I have this particular kind of career, we want to do this. We focus on the action, right? Without paying attention to the intention and understanding how we are shaped by and give shape to our professions through the intentions that we bring to them. Such that once you understand who you are called to be, what you need to have and what you are going to do seemingly fall right into place because your intentions are in alignment with your actions. Your intentions are in alignment with your actions. Howard Thurman calls this the inward journey. Listening for the sound of the genuine in ourselves requires a kind of deep listening, a contemplation, a prayer, or whatever it is that you want to call it. It calls you to ask a question that he poses right here, to not ask yourself what the world needs, but to ask yourself what makes you come alive and to go and do that. Because what the world needs are people who have come alive. Now, some people think, and I've often heard this, especially when I got to USD, because I was in a community where people could do something like this. They think they need to go somewhere to find themselves. They have to go out and backpack across Europe or climb a mountain or do something like that to go find themselves. But the truth of the matter is that no matter where you go, there you will be. No matter where you go, there you will be. These external factors, your particular social location, they have some importance, but crucially, this process is an inward journey. You can do this anywhere. You don't have to be removed from these external factors. However, you have to be willing to explore the innermost parts of who you are. You have to be willing to explore your vulnerabilities. You have to be willing to explore your humanness. It is in those moments when we can actually listen to our ancestors, when we realize that so much of who we are is both formed and informed by those who have been thinking about us and praying for us since before they knew of our existence. Going inward, I was able to listen to that voice that helped me discern my vocational call to be a preacher, a teacher, and a servant. Ultimately, this is why I decided to go to graduate school. It was the best way for me to fulfill my call. I couldn't do the work that I had been called to do without some additional academic credentials. I knew that I would not be taken seriously as a Black man without some letters in the front or in the back of my name. Now, there are a lot of reasons why people who look like me don't end up attending graduate school, or that while they are in graduate school, they decide to leave for their own mental health, or they simply can't afford it. There are a lot of reasons, but there are two primary ones that I want to lift up that I think are a through line that connects many of the other reasons I just named. Those are racism and sexism. Less than 6% of faculty across higher education are Black. from 2002 to 2017, of the roughly 50,000 people who earn PhDs each year, the percentage who were Black increased only modestly from 5.1 to 5.4%, according to data from the National Science Foundation. In 2017, there were more than a dozen fields, largely subfields within science, technology, engineering, and math, in which not a single doctoral degree was awarded to a Black person anywhere in the United States. That's crazy. In my own field of religion, there are roughly about 250 Black faculty in tenure track jobs in higher education. 250. So think about that. That means the USD Theology and Religious Studies Department that has 3 Black members has approximately over 2% of the Black religious intellectual capital in the field at this school, right? Because we have 3. That is amazing. It's a beautiful thing, but think about how crazy that sounds. The simple fact you all must recognize, if you already don't, is that racism is real, and that anti-Black and anti-Indigenous leanings is even more pervasive. As sociologist Joe Fegan writes, racism is built into the foundation of America. Racism is not some cancer that has infected an otherwise healthy body. America was founded on the genocide of Indigenous folks, the enslavement of Black folks, and the dehumanization of women. Because racism is a social fact, BIPOC folks, people of color, Black, Indigenous, other people of color, regardless of your professional aspirations, we must think strategically. You must have a few different plans in place to respond to the outcomes that do not go the way you hoped, because of racism, basically. This is what I have always done. And this was one of the best lessons I learned from my grandfather. You have to have multiple plans. When you finish your degree, I was like, I got 3 different things I can do because I cannot depend on the system working out the way it's technically supposed to. So I have to have options. This kind of strategic thinking is really the only way people of color in this country have been able to survive and thrive. Again, I learned this from my grandfather, who I mentioned earlier, he was a migrant picker. So born in Jim Crow South, Brookhaven, Mississippi. He wanted to be a farmer, loved farming. And he had found a particular job that he liked. He had found a land that he had liked, a farmer he wanted to work for, and that was going really well. He was making good money. He was saving enough money to buy his own land. He worked for this gentleman for almost a year. And he told the gentleman, he's like, hey, I've been saving up a lot of money. I really want to go on business for myself. I think I'm only gonna be here for about another 6 months. We can find somebody I can help train to take over for me when I'm gone. And the man said, Robert, I don't think that's a good idea. I've come to really depend on you. I don't think you should leave, and try to talk my grandfather out of it for all these different kinds of reasons. And ultimately, my grandfather was like, no, this is kind of what I want to do. I think this is the way I can kind of establish for myself, work for myself. And so the man tells my grandfather, if you quit, if you don't work for me, I will kill you. So you need to stay. And my grandfather, knowing this is 1950s Mississippi, did not take this as some kind of joke. He knew this was a realistic threat. So he said, okay, I keep working for you. Now he said that in his head, he was saying, I need to get the hell up out of here because this man is crazy. So he worked for another 2 weeks in that space until he was able to figure out his escape plan. And I want to be clear here. He had to have an escape plan. This isn't slavery. This is just Jim Crow, Mississippi. So he leaves in the middle of the night. He has friends that he walks to this other house where they have borrowed a friend's car, and they take the car and they drive to Jackson. He gets on the train from Jackson and goes to Chicago and takes a train from Chicago to Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is close to where they ended up settling in Three Rivers. He does all this stuff without telling my grandmother because he knows if he tells my grandmother's going to freak out and he's worried something's going to happen to her. So he gets up there and then he sends for her. And he tells her to say she just has family that she's going to visit in Chicago. So they don't stop her from getting on the train. And that's how my family ended up in Michigan. Thinking strategically. He knew that he could not be a farmer in this place, but he also knew he couldn't stay in Michigan or stay in Mississippi. So that's why he went to Michigan. He went to Michigan, ended up knowing that he can't make as much money in Michigan being a farmer, quite honestly, because of the climate. So he bought a little, or he saved up some money to buy a little land to grow food that he could sell, but got a factory job. Taught himself some basics of reading, went to night school to learn how to read while he was working at a factory job to get a promotion in order to lift his family up out of abject poverty to just being poor. This was his life. These are the lessons he taught us. And he would teach us these things and tell us these stories. And he talks about them like they're just matter of fact. He would just talk about this white dude that wanted to kill him like it wasn't abnormal. That's the stuff that has stayed with me. And that's the stuff that continues to shape who I am. Now, there are other reasons why, beyond racism and sexism, that people find it hard to succeed in competitive industries, right? Even if you think strategically, there's still become things that can kind of stop us. There are other reasons that hold people back from pursuing something that resonates within them, something that would actually help them listen to the sound of the genuine in themselves. And those two reasons, I believe, are fear and negative self-talk. Some people, especially those who grew up in middle class or above, they thrive on their perceived ability to control the outcomes. They limit their choices to trying to pursue things that they believe they have total control over. They fear not having control, and they let their fears shape their worldviews such that all they can think of is just the reasons they can't do something. They get wrapped up in the can't because they're like, I can't fully control that, so I don't know if I want to do it. I can't becomes the phrase that defines much of how they view their own agency in life. They will only do things that they're 100% sure that will work out with no risk of failure. Growing up poor and Black, but especially poor, I want to be clear here. I learned quickly that I really don't have control over anything in my life other than my response to situations, as I've named. That is the one thing I control. That's a scary realization when you accept the fact that you actually don't have control over much of anything. But it's also liberating. It's also ridiculously liberating when you realize all you have to do is stop worrying about focusing on trying to control every outcome, trying to focus on controlling all the stuff that's going on out in the world. Rather, you can focus on sitting to your inner world and being grounded such that you have the capacity to be resilient in the face of difficult, complex, and trying situations. There's your capacity to be grounded. So in those situations where you're joyful and you're happy and everything is going great, you can truly be in that moment. So for me, the phrase "I can't" has never really resonated with me. It's not that I have some unrealistic belief that I can do anything. I actually don't. I would say I'm looking at Perla right now. Sometimes Perla gets talking about math and I don't really know what she's talking about. It sounds really cool, but that's not my thing, right? So I don't have this unrealistic expectation that I can do whatever it is that I want to do. Rather, I've cultivated the habit of asking myself, how can I? And only after I've exhausted all my energy and desire in my pursuit of whatever it is I'm trying to do, only after I've done all that will I say, well, I can't do that. It is literally just this simple switch. Rather than focusing on saying I can't, I say, how can I? My mother, when we were growing up, never used to let us say we can't do something. I don't know why. When I asked her, she said she doesn't really know why. Because I asked her as I was preparing this lecture, I was like, why did you do that? She's like, I just don't think you should just get stuck in what you can't do. Just focus on what you can. And that was just her particular kind of philosophical approach. And so for me, that has always stayed with me. I get out of the negative self-talk because I will tell you this, negatively breeds negativity. Negativity amplifies other negativity. If you're around negative people, you become negative. You think negative. You think everything in the world is negative. So this isn't about the power of positive thinking. I'm not trying to tell you just go and think everything is great. No, this is the power of just neutral thinking. Just be neutral. Rather than focusing on how everything is terrible or how you can't do something, just be neutral and be like, how can I do something? Right? And that particular kind of approach has allowed me, I think, to do more than I would have ever thought I would do. There's an old saying that I've heard before that says, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And so for me, I would say that that has always stuck with me, that I always prepare as if I will succeed, so that when the opportunity presents itself, you're ready to take advantage of it. That's just how I have always been. I knew this field was going to be crazy competitive, trying to be a university professor, and that the statistical likelihood was that I was not getting a tenure track job. So I figured out everything that I knew I would have to do to put myself in position to get the job that I wanted, so that when I would apply for jobs, I knew I had done all I could do to get the job. And at that point, it was up to the search committee. At that point, I knew if they just gave me a chance, if they just gave me an interview, if they just gave me a whiff of an opportunity, that I knew I would be the best person for that job, that I knew I could persuade them to think that. And I knew if I got this job and I was in this school, that I would break this kind of metaphorical glass ceiling, not only for my family as the first person of color to graduate college, to get a graduate degree, to have a PhD. Not only would I break this glass ceiling of lifting up and honoring the name of my grandparents, but I would be able to do it for countless others who are marginalized and for various reasons weren't able to be here. I could prepare students who are first generation students like myself to give them the capacity to listen to the sound of the genuine in them, so that they could go into the world and do the work that they too were called to do. I knew I could make a difference if I just got the chance. And so when this chance presented itself, when I had this small window to apply for this postdoc, I was fortunate enough to be able to apply and to know some people here, but I had done all the work that I could possibly do, so that there was no reasonable way that they could turn me down. And I almost didn't get this job. That's another story for another day, but I almost didn't get it. But things worked out. And this is the last point that I think I want to leave you all with as I wrap up, because I've been talking longer than I actually thought I was going to. While there is something within everyone that listens for the sound of the genuine in themselves, there is also something that waits and listens to hear the sound of the genuine in others. The quest for the sound of the genuine in yourself is, in part, the ultimate quest to love yourself, to really, really love yourself, to love yourself enough to listen to the inner stirrings of your heart, the parts you like and the parts you don't like, the parts that are in need of tending and healing. By tending to the parts of ourselves that are afraid, that are carrying around old wounds of the past, the parts that are longing to give some creative gift to the world but feel stifled, by tending to those parts, we are able to love ourselves enough to quiet all the noise that makes it so hard to listen to the sound of the genuine in our own inner world. Paradoxically, learning to love yourself regardless, as poet Alice Walker would say, learning to love yourself regardless in this way enables you to truly love others for who they are and not for who you long for them to be. Loving yourself regardless allows you to love others without filtering them through the lens of your own hurts, without filtering them through the lens of your own agendas, without projecting your own value judgments on them, but to see them in their humanness and their brokenness, and to see small reflections of yourself, because you know that you too are human. You know that you too have parts of you that are broken and in need of healing. And so you can have compassion for them. You can see them. You can love them. When we learn to love ourselves and quiet ourselves to hear the sound of the genuine from within, we then realize that in moments with others, in conversations with friends and with loved ones, we can sometimes hear the sound of the genuine in them, even if they can't hear it themselves. Like my grandmother heard it in me, like my wife heard it in me. In this way, our quest for the sound of the genuine in ourselves is not an individual enterprise. It is a community effort. Sometimes you need to help someone listen to their own music because they can't quite hear it. And my quest to listen to the sound of the genuine in me should help you in your quest to listen to the sound of the genuine in you. As I am more in tune with my music, I'm better equipped to help you be more in tune with your music. And then your quest to listen to the sound of the genuine in yourself begins to help your friends and your family and your community. And when you find yourself in the company of friends and loved ones whose quest for the sound of the genuine coalesces with your own quest for the sound of the genuine, the music that we hear, this beautiful orchestra that bubbles up from within, this is what sustains community. This is what holds us together. This is that vision that we have when we talk about something like the beloved community. This relationships across difference, this way in which we see each other for who we are, and we love each other for that very thing. This is the music that I think we all are trying to hear. This is the music that will sustain us. This is the music that can continue to move us. It is the music that I believe that ultimately will save us if we learn to listen. If we learn to listen to the sound of the genuine. Thank you.
Do you want to lead a question and answer, Dr. Carter? Or
Oh yeah, totally. I'm actually trying to get rid of this. Let me see. Oh man, I think I have to keep the thing on here. Yeah, well, whatever. Yeah, totally. No, I totally want to lead. Yeah, I can lead it. See if I can minimize that. Yeah, that helps. Yeah. So any questions? I don't know if you guys want to put them in the chat or however you guys want to do it. Oh, thank you guys for the kind words. That's awesome. Or if you want to raise your hands, or however you guys want to do it, that'd be totally fine.
I have a question about the veganism.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't even mention. I mentioned it briefly, and I was like, I'll talk about that later. But yeah, no, please, Natalie, go ahead. Did we get the question about? I'm sorry, I couldn't. Is it typed? Oh, okay, it's getting typed right now. Cool. Okay. What made me transition to a vegan diet? Is this something your whole family participates in? If so, is it challenging with kids? Yes, I'm the cook in the family, so they don't have a choice but to participate. I will say the benefit is I'm a good cook, and so my wife, who totally is like whatever, she's not really. She likes food, but she's not like super into it. She's been fine with it. For me, what made me transition to veganism, honestly, so I talked a lot about my grandfather and my grandmother. So their experiences of growing up in the South and listening to their stories, particularly my grandfather's stories about how he was treated, and how he's treated like an animal. Quite honestly, the way people talked about it was very animalistic, and it has really drawn the connection between his treatment as a farm worker and the treatment of non-human animals, and how that kind of logic of dehumanization is essentially it's literally the exact same kind of dehumanization. The language people use, the logic people use to justify this kind of exploitation and treatment. There's a book called The Dreaded Comparison by Marjorie Spiegel, where she really kind of outlines how this is really a product of whiteness, this kind of gradations of what it means to be human. And so I became vegetarian in 2012, and slowly transitioned to veganism. And I was vegan probably around 2015, 2016. And that's actually a big part of what my book is about, is this kind of transition to veganism, but the exploration of identity. Because Natalie, what's also in your question is like, how do you maintain a sense of identity and community changing your diet like this? And so I think for me, it was about exploring and discovering other things I could cook that were consistent with my identity, that were really consistent with Southern Black food. And that's what I did. I mean, I, I spent a bunch of time researching and writing and learning about indigenous African foodways and agriculture, and it was turned out to be really cool. And my family really loves my cooking. And they're always, whenever I go home, I cook all the time. I like to cook, and then they like to eat it. It makes me feel good, and it's great. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. And my son doesn't know any better. I mean, Isaiah is like, he just eats what I eat. Like he doesn't know. So I was on a podcast a little bit ago, and I was telling the podcaster who was interviewing me, it was on NPR, something or other. And I was telling him like his favorite meal is this sriracha tofu scramble. And which is something that you wouldn't think a normal baby would eat, but my son loves it, man. He just is like, so he eats. So I think the downside is his palate is probably more developed than I would want it to be. He's gonna be probably picky and not want he's like, I don't want that kind of food kind of thing. But yeah, it's been fun actually with Isaiah. So thank you for asking. So Rachel, you asked, what do you feel is the most impactful moment you've had on someone else using your calling? Oh, wow. So there is one student that I'm not going to share her name, but there's a student that graduated from here a few years ago. And interestingly enough, she was in business school studying marketing. And she was in my office hours, and we were talking about the class that she was in, and I was asking her what she's studying. And all of you have me for classes, I kind of basically read your papers, and I begin to understand a little bit more about you. And I may press you on what you're majoring in, not because I want you to major in religion, but because I want you to make sure you are doing something that really resonates with you, that is the sound of the genuine in you. And so when we're talking, and she begins to talk about what she's doing, and I was like, I was like, well, why do you want to do that? I was like, who do you, when you think about yourself, like, who do you see? Like, who are you? Like, when you begin to get to the core of who you are, what are the things that make you, you? And how does that relate to marketing? And it's funny, is she was upset. She didn't like me ask that question at all. And she got defensive. Later on, this was maybe halfway through the class. Not that she got mad, but she got defensive. By the end of the class, she came to office hours. It was finals, and she's like, I really been wrestling with you. Ask me, and I really don't want to do marketing. I think it's just a way for me to get a good job. And we talked about it. And she was from a single mom, first generation college student. Again, all the stuff that I know. Long story short, she ended up going to nursing school, and that was through a lot of conversations we had multiple times. She really feels a particular kind of call to care for vulnerable populations. She ended up getting a 80% scholarship to Johns Hopkins to cover her nursing degree. And she is doing well. I was sad she didn't go to USD because I miss her. She was, I was hoping she actually was going to be the nanny to my son, because that's what she did at the time. So I had this whole plan worked out, but she got a great scholarship, and I was like, you need to go there. And yeah, so that's probably the impact that where I've used this kind of process of getting people to really asking different questions, not just what do you think is going to make a good job, but like, what about that resonates with who you understand yourself to be. I think it's been really helpful. So the other question is, how does preaching fit into my life now? Not as much as I would like it to. It does. I would say anybody that's had a class with me will tell you there are moments where you get a Dr. Carter mini sermon. That just kind of happens organically. I can't really stop that. But before, I would say the last 2 years, I've been without a church home. When I first got here, I was working at a church pretty consistently, and I would preach once a month, and I absolutely love preaching. I would say if I was a white man born in the 1800s, I probably would have gotten a PhD in preaching, in homiletics, because I really genuinely love the art and craft of speaking. This was such a challenging thing for me to write because it's so personal. I didn't want to write it all out. I wanted to just share stories, and that you probably could tell. But the art and craft of telling a story, of doing that formation of centering down and listening for me to the gospel, and just really doing that kind of internal work. I think one of the things I've always learned is good sermons have to preach to you first. And so yeah, I absolutely loved being a pastor. I was a senior pastor of a church in Compton for about 3 years, and it was amazing. It was the first time I realized that this whole vegan thing could work, because my church members basically adopted the same diet I had, because that's what you do when you're at a Black church. That's kind of pretty common. And so I would cook things and they would eat it because they're like, oh, the pastor's eating it. And so we got into this really health and wellness thing. People started, like, older people started losing weight. People started like reversing their diabetes. Like, it was crazy. It was the craziest thing. And I was like, it just really opened me up to the power of the connection between religion and food in ways I hadn't otherwise realized. And really all that comes from, for me, spending time in studying and preaching is all intimately tied to that. So thank you actually for asking that question, because it's like I said, something I don't get a chance to do enough of. So, oh man, what do you see of yourself and your son at this point? In what ways do your sounds harmonize together? So what's interesting about Isaiah that I think is so, like, funny, is Isaiah is probably, I mean, all kids are curious. I know all kids are curious because that's just part of what it means to be a kid. But he's really curious in ways where he's like trying to do something and not like get in trouble, because he knows he's gonna get in trouble for something. And that's like, my wife is such a rule follower. My wife is like, that's the rule. I'm not gonna do it. Let's just do this. And like, that is 100% me. That is 100% like, how can I go do something and hide even though I'm not supposed to do it? And then when I say, oh, Isaiah, what are you doing? He like acts all surprised and runs away. Like, it's funny. But I think what I see in him more than anything, this particular kind of curiosity and wonder, that I feel like I still have. And I think that's where he and I really have always, I think even when he was since he's been able to lift up his head, I feel like we've been able to connect on the kind of, in that way, that kind of curiosity and wonder that I think we both have for the world, that I try to encourage within him and I try to keep maintain within myself. And so I think the ways our sounds harmonize together are always around our play, and just the way we go to a park and just play. Like, I will tell you that one of the most amazing things in the world is, when you're an adult, is to just actually play and to let yourself be in the moment and just play. And I just say it like that because there's so many things that can look like. And he and I can just have so much fun imagining, throwing things, climbing on things, sliding down a slide when we go to the park. And I think that is the space where he and I really connect, is through play. And we can sit down and play in the sand for an hour and I'm totally fine. And it's so funny. My wife is like, how do you do that? And I don't know. And so that's a question from someone who clearly has children, because there's something about that I think really just stuck with me. So thank you for asking that, Perla. Have I ever struggled with my faith? No, I haven't struggled with my faith. I think for a few reasons. What I have struggled with is how other people practice. How do I say this? How Christianity is perceived and how people take Christianity and weaponize it and do harm. That's what I've struggled with. I've struggled with, should I be a Christian because of what it means, because how other people's interpretation of Christianity. So I'll say a little bit more. In my denomination, you have to get ordained. You have to go to give a sermon that's recorded that they evaluate and all that kind of stuff. And so the day I signed up to preach my provisional sermon for them to record, I just picked the Sunday that worked for my schedule because I'm already teaching. I got other kinds of stuff going on, whatever. So I happened to pick the first Sunday after Donald Trump was elected president. I did not do this on purpose, obviously, because I didn't know he was going to win. The church I was working at is it's called a reconciling church. So it's an LGBTQ. It's an open church for anybody. Anybody can go. It's not whatever. Regard, you ain't got to be Christian. Just be there. And so I'm like, okay, I got to go to church. I got to give a sermon on this day when all these white Christians voted for someone who I believe fundamentally lives a life that's antithetical to the gospel. Someone who really is inconsistent. Someone whose policies are inconsistent with everything I've learned about what it means to be a Christian. And so that began for me, I think, a really important moment in my life where I had to learn how to cultivate compassion for people whose wounds were so deep that they could convince themselves that this was a way of being in the world that was actually practicing their faith. And it was hard. I will tell you right now, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, this was really easy. You can just do A, B, and C. No, it took years of intention and prayer and work to see them as a full human being, despite their politics. Because I know that if I dehumanize them in any way, that's a tacit acceptance of the logic of dehumanization. And ultimately, that's the same kind of argument they're going to use against me. And so it's not going to work. My goal is to lure them to a way of being a person of faith that's more consistent with the vision that I think is in the gospel. And that's the work I try to do. And it isn't easy. It's challenging to talk to people that use their Christianity to weaponize in that way. And I've gotten pretty good at it. I tend to ask more questions than give answers. And my students they'll tell you, I try to help them understand they actually don't know what they're talking about. Usually it doesn't happen, but occasionally people want to get in a debate with the Bible or what the Bible says with me, which is hilarious because I am a theologian. I kind of know more about the Bible than you do. So, but it's funny. And I go along with it. But that's the stuff that's tested my faith. It has tested my faith that such a large percentage of people can have political policies where they try to prioritize one thing over another. When I say, oh, I'm a one issue voter or something like that, that again is not consistent with what actually it's not consistent not only with the text, but it's not consistent with what you mean when you say life. When someone says to me, I'm pro-life, I'm like, life is more than just being born. Life is all the stuff that goes along with allowing us to live a flourishing life. It's the institutions, it's the structures, it's the economics, it's the healthcare. That's life. So yeah, if you're be pro-life then. Like actually help me live a flourishing life. Help me stop the police from shooting me. Like help me educate my community. Like help me do these things. That's the stuff that gives life, not just birth. And so that's the stuff I try to help them unpack and see that I know I've done with some people. I haven't changed like all kinds of folks, but I really have been able to move some people in that direction. So now, so Esther, you know what's funny? Esther, I see your comment. So I gave a talk at a law school on religion, on animals and law and like the legal stuff around factory farming. And somebody in that chat said, "Can you run for president?" And this was right after the election. And so now I gotta like take a picture to show my wife because I'm like, I don't know, man. I hope you guys are trying to speak something into existence and call this on me and put this on me. But I'm like, you're kind of scaring me because I'm like, I don't feel like politics is quite my space I'm going to go into. But maybe I guess I have to at least sit with that now. So, oh man, Perla, I know. See, you're scaring me now. But yeah, so that's where that's for me is where I've struggled more with my faith. And I try not to be cynical. I try to really have faith in people and hope in people and really try to live in that compassionate space where I feel like everybody has that opportunity for reconciliation. And so I try to try to move people towards that. So.
There's a question in there right now.
Oh yeah. Oh man, what has been the most impactful part of being with your partner for over 20 years? I think the most impactful part has been that we've always been friends. And I think our friendship has been the thing that has sustained this. And I wouldn't have been able to do this without her. And we've had that kind of relationship that's been tested. I didn't mention this in the talk, But one thing that happened when I was in graduate school, and some of you know, because I've mentioned this in my classes, my wife and I, the thing you learn, unfortunately, one of the things you learn, you get a PhD in the humanities, I won't speak to the other degrees, is you learn how to deconstruct an argument really, really well. You learn how to dismantle everything. And so, unfortunately, that is not the best way to be in a relationship with your spouse, is to dismantle everything they say and tell them how all their thinking is wrong, or how they shouldn't feel that way because of A, B, and C. And that's what I was doing. And it was not a great space for us to be in. And it was, I mean, there's other stuff going on, and that's her stuff that I won't share with you all, but I can share what I know I was contributing to. It was my inability to, I was so defensive about everything. I felt like I had so much responsibility because I was working full time, going to school full time, and it was just too much. Quite honestly, it was just quite honestly too much. And so my wife and I were separated for about 6 months, and she just came home one day and she was like, "I think I need a separation," and then she just left. And at this time, I didn't have a job because I was working on campus, so I was like, I had a place or something that paid for my rent, but I didn't have any money. It was crazy. It was a real crazy time. And it's that time of my life that I rediscovered contemplative practices, where I rediscovered what my grandmother would call prayer, and what I tell you all is contemplative practices. This whole thing I talked about tonight is really one big contemplative practice. It's centering down. The inward journey is a big contemplative practice. And what I learned, what I did was return to the thing I knew to be true when this happened. What I knew to be true was in the moments where I knew myself and I was grounded in who I was. It was moments when I was in prayer. It was moments where I was in contemplation. In those moments where I felt grounded. And what I had to learn how to do is to feel my feelings again, to not intellectualize my feelings, but feel my feelings again, to not be so defensive, so that actually I can have a conversation with my wife and actually have compassion for her rather than telling her how she could feel. And so I think once we got through that and healed from that wound, our relationship has been outstanding. And I think the part that how this fits in with the comment about the 20 years part is that I feel like every 5 or 6 years, there's this, you kind of evolve. Like your relationship makes this like shift. And so like, even though we've been together for over 20 years, I feel like there's been like these chunks of like, okay, we had this phase and then we had this phase and we have this phase. And so it's been so different. And I think what makes it sustainable and what's made it so much fun is that like she genuinely is my friend. Like I actually like spending time with my wife. Like I miss her beyond just the physical intimacy. Like my wife and I both like sports. Like we will talk all day about like something with animals because she's a veterinarian. We'll talk all day about politics. We are very interested in just like helping people and serving others. Like she's done all kinds of relief work. And like she just is just a great person. And so I think that's the stuff that has been able to make it sustainable. Is I was so fortunate to marry someone who's my friend, who was my friend before I actually started dating her. And that I think has been the best thing. The movie San Diego for her has been good. She has a really good job. And so I think, so I said she's a veterinarian. She's actually a veterinary oncologist. And so she practices in Carlsbad, actually. And so the hospital she's at it's an amazing hospital. She has great doctors. I will say like the COVID thing has been really, really, really bad for her because it's bad for all medical professionals. Like they, many of you may not know this, but like after when everything first happened in March and April, they told veterinarians that they might have to be on call to serve as nurses because so many nurses were getting sick. And so my wife had friends that she went to vet school with in New York and New Jersey that were working on humans because so many doctors were getting sick. Some people were dying. It's crazy. And so yeah, it's like it's crazy. Like this has been really, really tense for her because of her friends and because of the field. Because as you probably know, there is human to animal transmission of this disease. And so the zoonotics department at the United States, like the World Health Organization and the U.S. equivalent, which name escapes me right now, they all work together. And so it's a really busy time. Like she's not working on a vaccine, but they're working on research to figure out how to make sure this stuff doesn't transmit to another human. Like it's been stressful, but it has nothing to do with San Diego. It has everything to do with the pandemic, which has just been, I mean, it's been stressful for everybody. You know, we're all ready for it to be done. I think that we might just be done wrapping up. It's about 7 o'clock. I think everybody did good. I don't need to talk forever. I want to thank, I mean, I know you guys are gonna say something, Rachel, but I want to say your comments, like this is what makes this work sustainable and like what it makes it worth doing, quite honestly. Like I'm not even gonna lie. This is what makes it worth doing. This is why Rachel can ask me to give a lecture, but I've been doing stuff all day and I still would do it because of the relationships that I have with you all. So many of you have had so many of your class. I'm gonna have some more of you in the class next semester. Karina, I will see you. I know. and I'm just grateful for your presence. I'm grateful for your love, quite honestly. And again, for your support. So if there's anything I can do for any of you all, you can always reach out to me, send me an email, and I'm just, a Zoom away. So thank you again for the kind words. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. Can everyone please give a big round of applause for Dr. Carter? I don't know if you can't hear it, but so we would like to thank you again for that absolutely fantastic lecture. We really appreciate you taking the time to prepare and present to us tonight.
We would like to take a group photo right now. So if you're able to turn on your camera at this time, please do and smile. Again, Reverend Dr. Carter, we appreciate this so much tonight, and we want you to know that you truly make a difference in the USD community and have a profound impact on students' lives.
I'm going to take a picture. I'm going to count to 3. Okay. Oh. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then one more. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right, let me just pull this up again. Okay, so we have a token of our appreciation for you on behalf of the 2020-2021 Mortar Board members. You will receive it shortly in the mail. And thank you so much again, Dr. Carter, and thank you very much to all of you for joining us this evening. We hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your night and a healthy, happy, and rewarding rest of the semester.
Thank you, guys.